Live. For public, for public meeting. Other than normal agenda.
You guys ready? We'll begin the meeting now. Everybody please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thanks. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Chris, we'll turn it over to you for the general fund budget.
Right. Well, good evening, members of the board, residents, staff. Chris Himes, Township Manager. For those who've been tracking along, this is our sequencing of all of our workshops that kind of build our annual budget. And we're now kind of finally moving on into the kind of more substance of our budget, which is in the general fund. For some reason, it wasn't working. I'm sure I got it. All right. So if you can see on the slide, here we are, Monday, September 29th, general fund. So we do have availability of directors as well as our two chiefs for emergency services as well, who are available for questions should you have them. And of course, segueing into next Monday night, that's more for the enterprise funds. If there's any remaining items based off of questions we might have and go back to the well for about another week or so, we can come in and review the general fund once again. And then on leading up into the meetings in October, the goal is still by the public meeting for the Board of Supervisors on Monday, the 20th. If everything is suited up and we're in a good position, we would still move forward with the advertisement of the budget at the October 20th meeting. Any questions about where we're at to date? All right. So we'll go ahead and get right into it. We're not doing like the full kind of top to bottom with all of the introductory type materials tonight, so we're just going to focus on general funds. We can go ahead and hop into it. But I still like to provide some semblance of historical kind of lens that kind of, you know, the past kind of coloring the future and beginning to still kind of understand just the nature of how our general fund is impacted over time. So with that, I'm going back to about FY16. That kind of serves as a good point because that's the targeted date where we finally did the regionalization of the police department, where that intermunicipal agreement was put into place. But it's kind of a good understanding of just the nature of impact of having all kind of services impacted through your general fund over time, specifically for emergency services, which take up about 50% of our budget. But with that, as you can see, there was kind of just a transition of a former surplus that was kind of invested in the police department that tipped us into a deficit. And then with that, with the latency of any tax increases over time, we got into that structural deficit. And that was right around 2023. When I came aboard on the township, we recognized that we were in a pretty significant structural deficit, which ultimately led in 24 and 25 of kind of that retroactive justification to raise the tax base because it had led itself into a position of having a pretty intense deficit. And of course, normalizing over those past few years, also making sure that we were still right-sizing our own internal staff needs, primarily for our community development and safety department, because we didn't have anybody in the seat serving that function. And of course, those all coupled combined led to an overall kind of categorical increase, mostly for personnel as we added them, basically starting in 2016 all the way through to like 2024 timeframe. And that's already been discussed. This is just another way to kind of frame it and look at it, but this should be of no surprise to anybody in this room who's been paying attention to it. But with that, here's just a chart view, and as you can see, the one thing kind of constant over time is just the ebb, or excuse me, the flow of increases over time. So things going up in cost is not a new thing in government. But with that, this kind of itemizes out what we are potentially attributing those to, but also a little bit into the future if you want to look at it, to let them know that if you regionalized, if you do kind of flesh out the wholesaling of services to build some level of sustainability in your expenditures, mostly related to our regional partnerships for emergency services, the goal would kind of try to keep the kind of continuous increases kind of at the same rate of revenues, primarily your scalable revenue, which is earned income tax. And with that, does it kind of match? And still, at the end of the day, we as a township are in a position where we don't have the forecasting capability to show increases in revenues, particularly for earned income tax, just of the nature of our township in and of itself. Our demographics, our job kind of industry footprint here, it's not significant enough to scale along with service increases over time. So you can see anytime you plan for getting them unified together, there's always an eventual departure. It's also one to forecast too, that you'll see when we're talking about our general fund impact for next year. We do have some smaller land development projects in progress right now. We have it with the Bancroft Road townhouse development, the 98 townhouses, as well as on Hillendale Road, Thompson Road, you have the 51 homes being built. Those are forecast to be built out in phases over the course of the next 4 years. But with that, you will see some increases in real estate income tax. And you're going to have a preliminary increase in the transfer taxes as the properties sell at our 0.5% on that, as well as permit fees. But eventually those revenues will go down because you no longer have that activity. Those are one-time non-reoccurring revenues. So what you'll see is you'll get a little bit of bump about the initial state, and it comes back down, and the remaining kind of aggregate increase in your earned income tax, it helps a little bit, but it's not necessarily anything that can scale with those other services. So this is just another kind of way to shape our primary revenue sources. This is just doing like a full FY16 to 30, and you can see over time, over 15 years, your earned income tax, basically from start to finish, would have gone up about $500,000. Without doing rate increases for real estate, your property tax, because of those assessable values coming online, only would have gone up about $150,000. So in total, about $650,000. And that's a number, but when you associate that with how much your expenditures are going up, you're talking about the multiple millions over the course of that same time frame. So one doesn't match the other. And that's always going to be the issue with second-class townships that have fire and police services, public works departments, all that kind of needs across the board. You're always going to have to find new sources of revenue. And the other compounding situation is our rising level of demographic of seniors, retirees, particularly in the township. So any kind of gains you might make in earned income tax, they're immediately washed out because somebody goes into retirement and their earned income tax comes off the book. So it's always a difficult equation to solve for. This is just another way of looking at it. So I think we all get the point. But just one thing to make sure that we have looked at as a township is the goal is always, and we've said this from the mountaintops as soon as we started putting our strategic priorities in place, funding services through growth, manageable growth, sustainable growth in targeted areas in the township, which is what we're doing right now with the implementation of zoning, activation of a comp plan priority in White Clay Point, and also making sure that we're assessing the kind of transportation needs by assessing a Act 209 fee for new developments, part of that sustainable growth initiative. So we're doing all the things we can do to kind of raise revenues based off of the plan that we've already had in place. And then also, it's one where we haven't necessarily ignored trying to do efficiencies within our own budget as well. We've leveraged more operational funds into the open space fund. We had a one-time project for the school project that created an increase of permit type revenues. So we actually end up using that in forecast future surplus for the 25, 26, and 27 budgets. So we're using those kind of cash position from that. we went to our function and increased fees. So you can see that it's not just we're relying solely on increases to fund services. We're also looking at what we already have at our disposal to also fund them. But it is important to know that if growth strategies are unsuccessful and you're not getting what you need from future growth, you're going to have to retool, reconfigure the internal parts of your budget by, as we have it right now in our capital fund, that interest income generated from the sewer sale. That's like your biggest revenue asset. It's not truly sustainable because it's based off of how much that interest is performing in the market. Obviously, it's an investment fund, but we would have to repatriate some of those dollars into the general fund if need be, as well as what would that mean? You would reduce your capital expenditures to afford your operational expenditures, which means that we wouldn't be able to do as much infrastructure improvements over time. And of course, tax rates and service cuts are always those kind of inevitable fallouts at the very end of it based off of your priorities. So it's like, we've already done this, we're planning to try to do this, and worst case scenario here. So you're trying to kind of balance and manage all these priorities here. So before we go into FY26, just another kind of budget to actuals update for FY25, which kind of informs where we're trying to go for the next year in terms of how much we have planned for. And really not a whole lot of changes or unexpected outcomes in the FY25 budget. I would say the biggest one is with the increases of our own staff being able to do some of the performance of our building inspection underwriters. We're actually able to kind of lower the cost because we're not having BIU carve into those revenues from permits as much as they previously had to. The normal kind of way it was is they do kind of all the work they did for inspection services, but since we had a very lean staff, we also had to have them do a little bit of permitting, a little bit of that kind of account management on the left and right hand side of it. So we had to pay them more for those services. But with that, we're now actually having to pay them less because they're basically just back to doing inspection services only, which is a help. So that was a good reduction. In terms of our revenues, though, we have identified some ways to mitigate some shortfalls for this year. Most of them around engineering. Escrow was a big one. We're invoicing them actively right now, and we have a plan in place to collect by the end of the year right now. So that's about $100,000. And that's just latency of land development and land developers not getting their invoices paid for our engineers reviewing their development functions as well. But what you can see is this was the first year that earned income tax in the last few years on average has kind of flattened out a little bit. There's no really way to say that what truly that's afforded to, because some years are big, some years are small. But on average, it usually goes up about $85,000 over the course of at least the last 6 years. This year, it's coming in under 30 as our projected amount. We did have a sizable decrease in transfer taxes. Shocker, high rates and a kind of iffy economy. People don't want to go buy houses. And so with that, that was projected to be short for this year, as well as in the township with a lot of new inventory. People with plans to retire in place, and you can see that that's just going to be activity that's going to kind of ebb towards historical norms. And then real estate collections rate, it's usually been around 99%. This year it's coming in at 96.7. We do our collections through the county. We're reaching out to them to try to see what might have been the difference between performance in the last few years and this past one. And if one where they don't really have an active plan to right-size that, we would probably switch our collections potentially from the county to Keystone Collections, which collects our earned income tax. So that's a decision in the making. We just want to get some answers from them first before doing anything like that. But this is FY25. And so I guess in this case, good news, if you can think about it, with some finalization of interest income that needs to be just kind of realized into the general fund. It comes in different buckets based off of rolling maturities. And the shortfalls in invoicing, this planned deficit would get wiped out to be a surplus by the end of the year. So that's what we're forecasting, is to be in the green by about $30,000 to $40,000 by the end of the year. So we're hitting our marks. Going into the proposed budget, I like to keep this as like an aggregate what's happening high level slide. But as you can see, overall, we're looking at about a net increase of about $430,000, attributed mostly, if you want to pull your eyes here, to our public safety type increases for EMS and police. primarily EMS, because this is a split cost here. It's mostly EMS out of this one fire. I think is only about 60 grand of a projected increase. And right now, that's mostly being able to be paid for in year by having a net forecast surplus by the fact that we have some of those permit activities and potential transfer tax activities coming online for the new developments going in right now. So it's one where for the in-year for 26, it's somewhat of a positive outlook. It's just making sure you understand that when these types of activities go away, the income tax behind it and the real estate tax behind it isn't as strong enough as well. So it's kind of like a plus and a minus for long-term forecasting. We also included, because last year we went pretty low on our wage increase compensation for employees at 2.5%. So we wanted to right size and average it out to be roughly over 3 for the 2 years combined and keep it consistently in that 3 benchmark. We want to kind of keep it in conditions with all of you look at your national indices for year-over-year labor-based wage increases, kind of monitored by the Fed. You have Department of Labor and Industry. They kind of keep pace with that. It's just like a metric that you want to look at. And then, yes, we're still using rollover surplus for this year. We're still leveraging our open space fund for personnel maintenance costs for our parks. But all this combined, the good news is, of course, the last few years we've had tax rate increases. With this plan, at least to start, we have no projected real estate tax increase for 2026. So that's a good outcome. Things to consider also is we're still not sufficiently funding stormwater, but this is a, kind of any budget here that's not to where it should be would be like putting chewing gum in a breaking dam kind of thing. So that's more for when we do finally get a sense as a community of how we want to scale resources to fund stormwater improvements, maintenance retrofits, all of that. That would be a better time to put in kind of a separate fund to look at that as a holistic program, more so than out of our general fund in the first place. And then, of course, still looking, if you remember from the capital budget, at some point, we're going to need to increase those transfers of revenues towards the capital fund to continue up with our capital infrastructure improvement plan, which is primarily for paving program operations. So we have that projected as a budgeted item FY28, and any potential windfall moment for additive revenues prior to that, any kind of those increases in revenues would help pay for that. So here's the big board. I like to kind of put it all up there, like a lot of noise. But all you're looking is essentially that kind of FY25 performance and then FY26 and beyond forecast. You can see the various proposed changes. All of them were really kind of baked into the fact that your public safety expenditures are the big one. I forgot to mention for community development, it's just because you have more inspections happening across the board for new development, your BIU fees are going to go up. So it's a good thing that they're not taking more of those fees. They're only taking kind of what their actual cut is for the actual inspections. All right. If no people have any questions about this is just another breakdown of where our revenues come from. It's primarily in this sustainable revenues, kind of year-over-year expectations. Did I lose my slide here? What'd I do? What's that? Okay, that's good. One more time here. Sorry about that. Technical difficulty. Did it do it again, seriously? All right. Yes, so we want to make sure that most of our revenues in the general fund are sustainable revenues, forecastable revenues for the most part. You want to limit your use of non-sustainables. That's your interest income. For us, using that based off of investments is just one where based off of your forecast rate cuts, you wouldn't be able to get the same level of gravity out of them for future years. So you wouldn't want to have backed operational expenses off of projected decreases in interest income, as well as just your own cash. This is where we actually got ourselves as a township into some trouble in terms of forecasted budgeting practices of using structural use of cash, if you remember that term. All that means is you have a deficit because you're using your own general fund reserve positions in order to fund operations. And that's like paying for your credit cards from your savings account. You don't want to get into that practice. For expenditure perspective, it's still kind of an easy kind of tell that if you look at the wheel here, obviously the Pac-Man look inside here, the C, it's primarily around public safety or kind of, yeah, public safety-esque type services, emergency services, public works, labor costs, as well as our community development and life safety department. So this hasn't actually changed really at all. So we still maintain this like heavy emphasis on the operational side around funding emergency services and inspection life safety functions versus, you know, kind of those compliance-driven pieces of your general fund, which is really just a function of being a second-class township in Pennsylvania. So all that's to say, any kind of reviewing on the capital fund side, because it's still kind of a quick update. You know, this was already talked about for, I think it was a few weeks ago, but one where we have a plan in place still to heavily replace infrastructure related towards mostly paving program, as well as some capacity building for our public works department. We're also trying to make sure that we're trying to increase, if you remember, our transfers coming out of our general fund, which not only pay for services, but build back our capital reserve fund position, because we've been using that over the course of the last few years as like a cash pay-go strategy. At some point, you got to replenish that well a little bit. So one, we also want to have it as an expenditure, increasing our reserve position back up to a healthy level. But yes, that's goal of kind of achieving this stasis of you're having a strong reserve position gathered, your sustainable cash flow is intact, and you're funding infrastructure replacements, that kind of repetitive process. You almost want to make it like a rinse and repeat type of function. Of course, there's the cash summary for what that does in terms of year-over-year planning by using our net beginning cash function or balance as of 25. And then net funds wise, this was another summary slide just to show kind of all of our breakdown in funds. Of course, not every fund is created equal for the most part, but if you take out our restricted funds, which is for your open space, for your airport, some of your remnant funds from like hydrant as well. Then you have your sewer sale investment fund. This is being used as a principal balance for investments. So if you kind of wipe all that out, you can still see the primary driver for decreases in our fund position, if you will, has been funding services for capital improvements. So that's one where we want to make sure that we're not depleting that without having a projected ability to replenish it into the future. And this is just another way of looking at it. So I'll briefly go into a little bit of summary details for public safety. I don't think we have, do you want to go through the whole slide presentation that Steve has, Guy? All right, I'll save you from that one. So it's here as a resource if you need it. It's about 30, 20 some odd slides. I forgot what it was. We'll use that as a reference for any questions and stuff. But it's good to know that if your primary impact on your general fund is your expenditures for public safety services, it's good to know kind of a little bit about what that means and who they are, because they are not departmental services for the township. They are, in fact, partnerships that we have regionally. And so this is just a summary slide of those kind of organizations, kind of what it means to participate for the township, what kind of governance structure may or may not exist for them, what our kind of obligation for financing it is as a municipality, most of it being around 80% of the municipal contributions come from Newgarden. So that is a heavy emphasis. It's not like 30 or 40, 80's a pretty significant percent. And then one thing to also kind of understand is what drives costs in those services. And this is at a very high level. This is almost too simple if you can think about it, but for our regional police department, it's generally driven by cost for personnel over a collective bargaining agreement that goes intact for about 3 to 4 years. And then it gets updated every 3 to 4 years, which usually includes some level of personnel-based increases for the actual officers themselves. Another one is for fire. It's a little bit more complex because you have like a fire and EMS split. But for the most part, the big shift in fire, and one of the biggest reasons that costs have gone up over the past several years, has been the decline in volunteerism at really across the entire nation, if you will, specifically here locally, as we're not immune to it. But in order to maintain those response times, to get individuals on the apparatus to get out the door roughly within a minute, within 4 minutes on scene, to have that level of response needed for whatever emergency it might be. You need people driving those apparatus in that direction for a call. And that's harder and harder to do because we're losing volunteers that normally kept costs low. So in order to keep that same level of service at a level of response, you need to have paid staff because you can't generate those hours with volunteers anymore. So cost driver for them has been mostly payroll through the Avondale EMS fund part of it. And that's been mostly because EMS services in of itself are one of the highest drivers for demand in the area. And of course, we also have other drivers for individual demands coming from most notably the wellness facility, I'll call that Bowling Green, up in the north side of the township. Its driver right now of about 30% of all call volume, specifically over the last few years. So if you have a funding formula that kind of, I'll call it awards calls for service for EMS calls, and you have something uniquely conditioned to increase that demand on calls for service for EMS calls, it's essentially kind of like a tail wagging the dog type situation. So it's going to increase the demand in your community. Of course, having another regional partner kind of shared at the hip here for funding the service helps, but we don't. So with the loss of London Grove in 2021, we lost that regional partner. And of course, that led to a fall of assistance for paying for services. So we are essentially, all, kind of thoughts out to Avondale Borough. But in terms of the scale of expenditures towards who's funding what, we don't have a regional partner. So we're a single township, single station model here. The good news is we've been actively trying to address this. So this hasn't gone kind of unnoticed. So Guy, I think it was back in last summer timeframe, we got together and had a consensus meeting about what we can do. There was kind of a pathway with the West Grove Fire Company identified, so they've been pursuing that over the course of the last several months. And of course, it's positioned to be, at least at the fire station level, brought to some sort of agreement by the end of this year, which could change also the governance structure over that merger solution. Of course, that would involve all of these communities that are kind of participate in those companies. And then what that means from a future funding formula is to be determined. So 26 is going to be a little bit of like an interim period that could change as the start of 2027. So that's the good news is we recognize this and have been trying to proactively, or in this case somewhat reactively, but based off of when we identified it, proactively trying to change the tide rather than having to react to some sort of future fallout from it. That's all. So for the increase, we'll get that in a second if you want to hold off on your question and individual ones. And the easy answer is hours to man shifts, specifically overnight, because they don't have people and that time frame to respond. So we don't have we don't have paid hours for personnel in certain hour time frames. And that is a function of we need to put somebody in that, and that's a paid cost. So that driver and cost is really for personnel. All of it is really for personnel. Yeah. Yeah, I can't speak to anything in the past. I can just say that the information that was sought after back in, at least when I joined the township at 23, has been conditioned to better understand it, which I would really request people, I'm going to kind of shoot forward here, to really dive into these slides if they really want to see kind of that yearly performance. It was in last year's budget for last year's slides and how this kind of comes forward, because you're right, you can't make good decisions without data, but we've been pretty good about making sure that that kind of financial performance and data-led decision-making function has been there as well. Yeah. So we'll get into some sidebar discussions after the fact, but yeah. So with that, you can see the, at least putting them together, it's still one where you can see the history of it. It is going up. It's still kind of somewhat lesser in scale of policing services, but just in general, them two combined, that's just essentially the if you can have regional partnerships, if you can do some of the sharing and distribution, wholesaling of the service of itself, but if you are the sole provider or like the 80% provider of it, and you're on the hook for that based off of municipal agreements, any windfall moments and changes in terms of how those services are provided and the cost behind that, it's going to impact you pretty significantly year over year as a township. There's no way around that, I should say. Some ad options, these were put out there for consideration, but they're not necessarily approved. Mostly, obviously, for anything with police, it has to also be reviewed and approved upon by the West Grove Borough Public Safety Commission members as well. But there was a recognized need to do essentially a promotion need to get one of our patrol officers into a detective status to help clear existing caseload work that's kind of, I guess, a growing list, if you will. I'll put it that way. You can probably describe it better than I can. But with that, we would have an additional patrol officer as a backfill option to replace that person. Of course, these are kind of the highlighted areas. We can get into some of the maybe the reasonings about some of the perceptions about it from the community survey, but additive capacity for the police department was a survey-led need as well as a request for consideration from Southern Chester County Regional. There was another one too. It was just came up from a kind of feedback from our internal side and staff. This was shared with police and with township staff. So we do currently have, I'll consider to be a pretty high deductible plan. We do have an HSA that has a municipal contribution and the option for an employee to match. So it's one where previously we didn't really have a lot of like HR management. So, working with our staff to kind of facilitate better ability to show the true benefits of our benefits plans been helpful. And so we're going to continue to train to that. But it's just one for consideration as well, because healthcare benefits are another consideration of a retention tool. And we did lose personnel this year just due to their dissatisfaction with our existing plan. But of course, that doesn't come without a cost. And that's one where right now we're working through some discussions about what it means to kind of shift around funding priorities, but still keep the tax rate the same. But if you were just to do the net, what's the delta difference between paying for it or not? It's about a 0.2 mil equation to solve for. So this isn't official. We're not voting on anything. This is just to show what that impact is. And of course, this could change even tomorrow as we continue to have these conversations, but I wanted to make sure these options were discussed. And then going into quickly, the fire and EMS, these are kind of the aggregate budget amounts because we have the Public Safety Commission, which kind of does all of the line item reviews for the police budget. Not that similar opportunity usually for fire. So Guy and I worked on this about 2 years ago to kind of put this review together so you can see kind of the incremental year-over-year shifts in it, which on the fire side, it's pretty stable. I would say the one, actually has been stable around the fire side. It's just been our percentage kind of across the board of our contribution to it. But as you can see on the EMS side, payroll is the primary driver, and it's really just been the need to man more and more shifts with more and more personnel. And you can probably speak to a Guy better than I can, but it's like, even at the end of the day, with this proposed contribution increase, the actual delta between having a fully responsive EMS side, or I guess in this case, personnel side, it's still not there. You probably wouldn't get there until you get how many people would need for the 4 minutes response, 80% coverage from apparatus response to a scene. Yeah. And how many do we have how many are we behind on that? Okay. To try to still get there. And that's kind of getting out of the former kind of discussions around just what's driving the contribution increases based off of your prior year's performance, if you will, kind of, population base, your accessible values of your property, your calls for services, everything that, and getting more of a metric of what that simple question is what kind of service do you want to have? It's really about how fast of a response and how many people do you want there that are qualified to be there on scene do you want within your, phone call to 911. And that's kind of what should be driving the service levels here because, I mean, we talked about it before. We have enough of a population base with some kind of, we'll call them certain organizations in the township kind of creating a demand. But we also have this kind of graduating demographic of older and older people. So the forecast in the township outlook-wise is EMS calls are not going to be going down anytime soon. So this is going to be a driving demand for expenditures in the township. And of course, it's one that's kind of uniquely tied. The EMS calls for services are going to be coming more and more from a demographic of people who are paying less and less earned income tax over time. So it's kind of like an unbalanced equation there. So,
And Chris, can you throw your little Medicaid?
oh yeah,
Don't forget that because that's when the
this is
perfect
actually in the
storm
fire
arrives.
contact. Like there didn't need to be someone throwing a grenade into the middle of that situation. Where does a lot of the EMS billing for Avondale Fire Company come from? Well, a lot of it, half of it comes from Medicaid. So if you've been paying attention to the big beautiful bill that was passed, essentially Medicaid cuts will lead to revenue recovery loss for EMS billing returns. So we're about to have a federally government driven unfunded mandate for costs for revenues. I don't know what the percentage will likely be, but this will go, I mean, the types of calls won't go away. They'll be the same demographic. We will just get less revenue from them.
Yeah. And if you look at some of your previous things with our demographics, I'm not far from Medicaid myself, and I'm not going anywhere, and I will retire here if I can afford to live here. But 51% of the calls are built through Medicaid now, and you're going to lose 50% of the funding. So what do you think that's going to do to the Avondale Fire Company's budget?
So
It's
that
bold,
is
it's bold of you to assume you'll even get to retire, Steve.
with
Carry me out of the house.
with no real kind of structured rundown for Avondale Fire at this point. That kind of ends really I'll call it the formal, if you will, presentation for tonight. This is just more about any questions, what can be re-looked to, reviewed into, any sort of ancillary details. I do have the availability of the line item budget to pull up if you need to go into that, but right now it's just for questions and answers. Hopefully more answers.
Now, I think that's where we're at, and we'll continue to work through the process. Nothing is in concrete here. There will be some minor adjustments as we get insurance projections into the
Yep.
mix. I think we're going to try to meet the fire company and the police department part the way there, because again, that storm is only brewing out in the sea right now and is going to get much greater impact.
So it's another kind of way, and I should probably put this as a kind of review to it. If you consider the EMS contribution for Avondale Fire Company to be quote unquote like a payroll driven expense, pretty much 100% of the police contribution is a payroll reflected expense, just how that agreement works out, as well as our own payroll. And this is independent of the airport staff because they're in a separate fund paid for explicitly with airport revenues. 67% of our operating fund is payroll related, and that's salaries and benefits. And so anything that kind of pertains to impacting from that is going to be an inordinate impact on our general fund. And that's because this is a highly operational budget based off the fact that it's mostly for providing services of people being available to respond and perform maintenance, labor, all that kind of stuff. Goods, bads? Sure. Do we have enough time for? They do, and Guy, do you want to speak about some of the, yeah. It was, yeah. So they are not required to pay more, but they have been contributing more as of recent. Yes. Yeah. So they're part of the billing revenue, if that makes sense. Yeah. We looked at it last year as like if they were their own island state borough and they were given the same funding formula, they should actually be paying in about 200 and some odd $1,000, which would reduce out of our general fund expense too. Correct. Because while they're paying for the EMS billing, it's also to understand that EMS billing is only a portion of the required revenues, the expenditures being mostly paid for, in this case, by municipality, because that's New Garden. Okay.
Mm-mm.
It's trying to form partnerships, and but there's no, like, we can't tax them separately. We can't, and we don't have the authority to really get them to pay quote unquote their fair share. But it's just a reflection of this is in your community, so it's in your community. You know, no one else is going to pay for it. If you're a Uber gig worker, just hit pass on that one. The day for this upcoming, it would be on October 20th, would be the first day that we could officially advertise. It has to go through that 30-day public comment period. And then in the November meeting, because the dates line up, we could motion to approve the budget in November. Normally in years past, we've waited until November to do that, and then that only leaves you like literally the month of December to get it done. Otherwise, you got to go into that very clunky second-class township budget approval process in the January and February timeframe. So you try to avoid that. Don't be late. Oh, real quick, I had. I'll amplify your question here. Thanks. So what's that? So the statement for the record is just, you know, for benefits increases for paid employees, police, and in this case, township staff. Fire is a completely independent organization, so we have no control on those benefits other than paying for a kind of throughput with our contribution that Mr. Dungy would support it. Yes. Well, thank you very much. And that's part of having a accredited community-oriented policing model. So those standards, that level of accreditation, you've seen recently that kind of ramp up from some of the other localities gaining accreditation. It reflects the value towards adhering to compliance and standards and practices of community-oriented policing. And I think that's a lever that a lot of municipalities are going to be seeking their police departments to do, because in Pennsylvania, what's the level of percentage rate of accredited agencies versus non-accredited? But not like how many local policing agencies are in Pennsylvania, give or take? Yeah. If you think about it off the top of your head, there's like 1,500 second-class townships. Yeah. It's essentially just meeting your community on their terms of what you need. So detective services for what you need to adjudicate cases around that type of service, traffic safety division, your patrols, everything. So it's, yeah. Sure. For those monitoring at home, we're solving fire volunteerism. Yep. Yeah. Did I miss something? Oh, gotcha. Um, so, regardless. Yeah, it's a,
Can we have that entered for the record?
what's that?
Can we have that entered for the record?
I'm sorry, I can't.
The township is full of unusual people, one of which is Guy Swift.
But no, you're right, and it is a complicated issue. There is no one solution to it. It's generational. It's the fact that, we don't have a lot of young people in the township to volunteer in the first place. There's a lot of reasons for it. There's the fact that volunteering would usually be under time when you had enough stabilized in your home so that you could actually like work a 9 to 5 and then go volunteer. People don't have that luxury anymore. They have to work 2 jobs in order to make ends meet. There's just, so that saturation on your own personal ability to put food on the table is done. So it's a compounding issue that we can't solve for. We are a consumer of that reality as a township. And this isn't just New Garden, it's across the board, and we're not unique. And that's helpful to kind of understand that at least we're all in this terrible boat together. Any other questions? What we can do is we'll continue to meet to talk offline about some of the conditions that we can do to try to figure out, those options, if you will.
Mhm.
And then with that, come back forward with like a recondition plan next week. And the goal still being, because we want to make sure that we're providing excellent value is to work to keep under that threshold of the 3.27 rate intact as well. So that'll be part of the exercise. So always fun. But that's it. If there's no other
Yeah.
questions.
Now, I just want to say, Mr. Dungy, we have your letter on the parks. I think it was very thoughtful and certainly. Nope, appreciate it.
But that's it. I don't have anything else if there's no other questions.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion.
There's all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you all.